A little girl dropped her teddy bear. Every person in that restaurant saw a tourist. But Samuel Briggs saw something else. 3 fingers tapping his wrist in a pattern only dead men should know. Then armed vehicles surrounded the building. Phones went dark, and the child whispered words that made a crime lord's blood turn to ice. What happened in those next seconds will leave you speechless. Samuel Briggs owned Las Vegas. Not the glittering casinos tourists see. The real Vegas. The bones buried in the desert. The politicians who took envelopes. The judges who lost their memories when his name came up. At 47, with steel-gray eyes and a reputation built on shallow graves, Briggs was untouchable. He'd spent 8 years building an empire on someone else's foundation. Someone everyone thought was dead. But dead men don't send 9-year-old girls into exclusive restaurants. They don't teach children signals that vanished with the old regime. And they certainly don't plan comebacks that start with a teddy bear and end with a throne reclaimed. What Briggs didn't know, the little girl wasn't lost. She wasn't scared. She was the messenger. And the man everyone called the Builder had spent 8 years in the desert, not dying, but waiting, building a shadow army, training his granddaughter, planning revenge against the protégé who betrayed him. That night, Le Sanctuaire would transform from an exclusive bistro into a battlefield. A child would reveal herself as something far more dangerous than innocence. And Samuel Briggs would learn the hardest lesson of his criminal career. Some debts can never be buried deep enough. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about crime and betrayal. It's about legacy, loyalty, and the price we pay when we steal what was never ours to take. Le Sanctuaire sat beneath Las Vegas like a secret the city kept from itself. You couldn't find it on any map. No neon sign pointed the way. Just a vintage bookstore on 5th Street with an elevator hidden behind a false wall and a door that only opened for people who knew which book to pull. The restaurant stretched across an underground cavern that had once been a speakeasy during Prohibition. Now it catered to a different kind of criminal, the ones who wore $1,000 suits and called murder conflict resolution. Red velvet booths lined walls that absorbed sound. Crystal chandeliers caught the candlelight and scattered it like diamonds. The wine list featured bottles that cost more than most people's cars. This was where Samuel Briggs held court every Tuesday evening. Tonight, he sat at his usual corner table, back to the wall, commanding a view of the entire space. 3 bodyguards flanked him at strategic positions, Victor near the entrance with his hand never far from his shoulder holster, Marcus by the kitchen watching the staff, Diego close enough to intercept threats, but far enough to maintain the illusion of privacy. Briggs had learned young that control meant seeing everything before it saw you. His father had died because he'd sat with his back to a door. Briggs wouldn't make the same mistake. He cut into his filet mignon with surgical precision, listening to his lieutenant discuss shipment schedules and payment collections. Numbers, territories, percentages, the mathematics of power. This was the empire he'd built. This was the throne he'd stolen. 8 years since the builder's death. 8 years of prosperity. 8 years of believing he'd gotten away with it. Then the heavy oak doors opened. The temperature in the room shifted. Not obviously. but Briggs felt it the way a shark feels blood in water. Conversation continued at other tables. Silverware clinked, wine poured. But something had changed. A man walked in, mid-40s, khaki pants, polo shirt, unremarkable in every way except the way he moved. Too smooth, too aware. The walk of someone who'd been trained to blend in, but couldn't quite hide the military precision in his step. Beside him, a little girl clutched a worn teddy bear. 9 years old, maybe. Dark hair pulled back with a simple ribbon. Black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Enormous brown eyes that swept the restaurant with an intelligence that didn't belong to a child. The maître d' approached them with barely concealed irritation. Le Sanctuaire didn't serve tourists, especially not tourists with children. But the man, Alan Bell, according to the reservation that shouldn't exist, showed something on his phone. The maître d's expression shifted from irritation to confusion to reluctant acceptance. He gestured toward a table across the restaurant. As they walked past Briggs' table, something made him watch. Maybe it was the way the girl held her teddy bear, too carefully, like it contained something precious. Maybe it was the way her eyes found him in the crowd, held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked away with perfect calculation. Or maybe it was instinct. The same instinct that had kept Samuel Briggs alive through 20 years of betrayal, violence, and blood. The girl's teddy bear slipped from her grasp. It tumbled to the floor, landing at Briggs' feet with a soft thud. She didn't cry out, didn't draw attention, simply knelt down to retrieve it, her small hand reaching for the worn brown fur. That's when it happened. As her fingers closed around the teddy bear, her other hand, hidden from the cameras, concealed from the other diners, touched Samuel Briggs' wrist. Not a grab, not a squeeze. 3 rapid taps. Index finger. Middle finger. Ring finger. A precise rhythm that lasted less than 2 seconds. Briggs's breath stopped. His blood turned to ice in his veins. His mind raced through possibilities, rejecting each one as impossible. The ghost signal was mythology, a communication method created by the builder 20 years ago for his deepest cover operatives. Men and women, so buried in enemy organizations that even their handlers couldn't contact them directly. The signal was simple, 3 taps in sequence, but it meant everything. I'm alive. I remember. The old regime still exists. The operatives who knew that signal were supposed to be dead. Briggs had personally overseen their elimination during the purge that followed the builder's assassination. Every name on the list, every face in the files, every loose end tied off and buried in the desert. But this child had just performed it, with the precision of someone trained. The little girl stood up, clutching her teddy bear. She looked at Briggs with those enormous brown eyes, and smiled, sweet, innocent, heartbreaking. "Thank you, sir," she said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Then she walked away with her father, and they took their seats at their assigned table. Briggs' hand trembled as he reached for his wineglass. Victor noticed immediately, moving closer, hand sliding toward his weapon. But Briggs held up a hand, signaling him to stand down. His mind was spinning, calculating, trying to understand what had just happened. That signal couldn't be an accident. The probability of a random child knowing that exact sequence was impossible. Which meant someone had taught her. Someone who knew the old protocols. Someone who should be dead. Briggs pulled out his phone and sent a single-word text to his intelligence officer. Background. Across the restaurant, the man and girl were studying their menus, like any normal father and daughter. But Briggs noticed details now that he'd missed before. The way Alan Bell kept his back to the wall. Professional awareness. The way his eyes swept the room every 30 seconds. Threat assessment. The way he positioned himself between his daughter and the entrance. Protective instinct. This wasn't a tourist. This was an operator. And the girl. Briggs watched as she colored on the children's menu the restaurant provided. Her movements were completely natural, perfectly innocent. But those eyes, when she looked up from her crayons, when she glanced around the room, there was a calculation there that froze his blood. She wasn't looking at pretty lights and fancy paintings. She was counting exits, identifying targets, memorizing faces. Briggs's phone buzzed. The text from his intelligence officer was brief. No reservations under Bell. No record of entry. Checking cameras now. Impossible. Le Sanctuaire required reservations made at least 2 weeks in advance. Background checks, financial verification, security clearance from Briggs himself. No one walked in off the street, ever. Yet somehow this man and child had not only entered, but had been seated without raising a single alarm. His phone buzzed again. "Boss, we have a problem. Multiple vehicles approaching perimeter. No IDs. Armed personnel. ETA 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Briggs's eyes snapped back to the table where Alan Bell sat with his daughter. The man was cutting Janet's steak for her, the picture of paternal care. But as if sensing Briggs's gaze, Bell looked up and smiled, not the friendly smile of a tourist, the cold, knowing smile of a predator who'd already won. That's when the little girl, named Janet, looked directly at Samuel Briggs and mouthed 2 words, "He's home." And Briggs understood with perfect, terrible clarity what was about to happen. The builder hadn't died in the desert 8 years ago. He'd survived. He'd waited. He'd planned. And now he was coming to reclaim his throne. The ghost signal hadn't been a warning. It had been a death sentence. Briggs stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Around him, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm. Conversations in hushed tones, wine being poured, deals being negotiated. No one noticed that the most powerful man in Las Vegas had just received notice of his own execution. Victor moved closer. "Boss?" Briggs didn't answer. He was calculating distances, exits, odds. 3 minutes until armed vehicles arrived. Maybe 24 diners in the restaurant, most of them connected to his organization. Civilians who would panic if shooting started. Police attention that would destroy everything he'd built. He looked at Janet again. She waved at him. Small fingers wiggling. A child's gesture of greeting. But her eyes held no innocence. Only cold intelligence. And something that looked almost like pity. Briggs pulled out his phone with trembling hands. He had 3 minutes to prepare for war. Or 3 minutes to realize he'd already lost. What would you do if everything you'd built was about to be taken away by the one person you thought you'd destroyed? Drop a comment and let me know. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and revenge. Briggs stared at his wineglass, watching the red liquid tremble with each heartbeat. 2 minutes now. His phone sat silent on the white tablecloth, waiting to deliver news he already knew would destroy him. His mind pulled him backward against his will. 8 years dissolved like smoke. The builder had found him in a county jail cell, when Briggs was 23. Assault charge, third strike, pending. The old man had walked through those iron bars like he owned them, sat across from Samuel, and said 6 words that changed everything. "You're wasting rage on small targets." Within a week, the charges vanished. Within a month, Briggs was learning how real power worked, not the street corner kind. The kind that moved through boardrooms and ballot boxes. The kind that made politicians sweat and judges forget. The builder taught him everything. How to read men's fears. How to turn loyalty into currency. How to build an empire so quiet that nobody realized it existed until they were already trapped inside it. Power isn't taken, Samuel. It's cultivated, like a garden that grows in the dark. For 15 years, Briggs had been the perfect student, the loyal lieutenant, the son the builder never had. But loyalty has a price, and Briggs had finally calculated the cost of always being second. He remembered the night everything changed, a penthouse overlooking the Strip, the builder explaining his succession plan, how the empire would be divided among the old guard when he retired. Briggs would get territory, respect, comfort, but not the throne. "You're not ready, Samuel. Maybe you never will be. Some men are born to build. Others are born to maintain what's built. There's no shame in knowing which you are." Shame. The word had burned like acid in Briggs' chest. He'd spent 15 years proving himself, bleeding for this empire, sacrificing everything, and the old man still saw him as a caretaker, a middle manager in an empire Briggs had helped construct with his own hands. That night, watching the builder sip whiskey and discuss legacy like Briggs wasn't even in the room, something inside him died. Or maybe it was born. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. 3 weeks later, Briggs had hired the specialists, ex-military, the best killers money could buy. They'd ambushed the builder in the desert during a routine inspection of the southern routes. Briggs hadn't been there for the actual killing, couldn't stomach it, but he'd seen the photos afterward, the body in the shallow grave, the blood in the sand. He'd told himself it was necessary. Evolution, the old making way for the new. He'd never let himself call it what it really was. Patricide. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. Victor's message was brief. "Confirmed. 12 vehicles. Military-grade weapons. They're not hiding anymore. ETA 90 seconds. Briggs looked across the restaurant at Janet. She was eating her steak now, small bites, perfectly mannered. But she was watching him, too. Those ancient eyes in a child's face. She smiled. And in that smile, Briggs saw the truth he'd been running from since that teddy bear hit the floor. The builder hadn't just survived. He'd sent his own blood to deliver the message. 60 seconds until everything Briggs had stolen came back to claim him. 8 years ago, desert highway 60 miles outside Las Vegas, the kind of road that existed only on maps criminals kept in their heads. Briggs sat in his car, engine off, watching headlights approach through the darkness. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, but the trembling wouldn't stop. The builder's black sedan pulled up exactly on time. The old man stepped out alone, just like Briggs had requested. No bodyguards, no security detail. Just faith in the son he'd built from nothing. "Samuel!" The builder's voice carried across the empty highway, warm, trusting. "You said it was urgent." Briggs climbed out of his car. His mouth was dry, his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape what came next. "There's something I need to show you, about the southern routes, possible infiltration." The builder nodded, started walking toward the desert. Briggs followed, each step feeling like betrayal made physical. They walked in silence, stars scattered across the black sky like accusations. The desert sand crunched beneath their feet, the only sound for miles. "You're afraid," the builder said it quietly, not turning around. "I can hear it in how you're breathing." Briggs's hand moved towards the gun beneath his jacket, stopped. The builder turned to face him then. In the moonlight, the old man's eyes held something that made Briggs's stomach drop. Not surprise, not fear, sadness. "You think I didn't know?" The builder's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Samuel, I've known for 3 weeks, since the night you decided my legacy wasn't enough for you." Briggs's throat closed. "Then why did you come?" "Because I needed to know if you'd go through with it, if the man I built would destroy me himself, or if he'd at least have the courage to look me in the eye." Red laser sights appeared on the builder's chest, 4 of them, the specialists hidden in the rocks beyond. "You don't have to do this," the builder said. "There's still time to choose differently." But Briggs had already chosen, months ago, maybe years ago, maybe the moment he'd realized he would always be the son, but never the father. He stepped back, raised his hand. The desert exploded with gunfire. The builder went down. Blood bloomed black against his white shirt. His body crumpled into the sand like something wholly breaking. Briggs stood frozen, watching, waiting for the old man to move, to stand, to show him this was another test, another lesson. But the builder just bled. The specialists emerged from the rocks, professional, efficient. They rolled the body into a shallow grave, covered it with sand, erased the evidence of what had happened here. "You want us to verify?" the lead specialist asked. Briggs looked at the fresh grave. His hands had finally stopped shaking. "No, we're done here." He'd driven back to Vegas alone, stopped at a rest area bathroom, and vomited until nothing was left. Then he'd washed his face, straightened his tie, and called a meeting of the organization's leadership. "The builder is dead. Cardiac arrest. He wanted the transition to be smooth. I'm in charge now." Some believed him. Some didn't. Those who didn't disappeared within a month. The purge had been systematic. Every operative who'd been personally loyal to the builder. Every soldier who'd taken the ghost signal oath. Every loose end that might remember the old regime. Briggs had built his empire on their graves. He'd told himself it was necessary. Evolution, the price of power. He'd never let himself think about the look in the builder's eyes before the bullets flew. That terrible sadness. Like watching a son choose darkness when light was still possible. Now, sitting in Le Sanctuaire, with armed vehicles closing in, Briggs finally understood. The builder hadn't walked into that desert to die. He'd walked into it to teach his final lesson. Some betrayals can't be buried deep enough. 30 seconds had passed since Victor's last message. Briggs watched Janet across the restaurant, trying to read her next move like he'd read 1,000 opponents before her. But she was just a child eating steak, cutting small bites, sipping water, completely normal except for the intelligence burning behind those eyes. Then she stood, pushed back her chair with careful precision, picked up her teddy bear, and walked toward the restrooms at the back of the restaurant. She had to pass Briggs' table to get there. Victor tensed. His hand slid inside his jacket, but Briggs shook his head slightly. Not yet. He needed to understand what was happening before he could respond. Janet walked slowly. Her black shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, measured, like she'd rehearsed this exact path 100 times. As she passed Briggs's table, her teddy bear shifted in her arms. Something slipped from beneath its worn fur. A photograph, old and creased, tumbling through the air in slow motion. It landed face up on the white tablecloth, directly in front of Briggs. Janet didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept walking toward the restrooms, like nothing had happened. Briggs stared at the photograph. The builder stood in a garden somewhere, younger but unmistakable. His arm was wrapped around a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. Between them, a baby girl smiled at the camera, her tiny hands reaching toward the light. Written on the back in faded ink, Sophia, age 2. The future remembers what we forget. Briggs' blood turned to ice. The builder had a daughter, a family Briggs had never known existed, which meant... His phone buzzed. Background check on Alan Bell had finally come through. Former Delta Force, Black Ops Specialist, officially KIA in Afghanistan 2019. Records sealed. Resurfaced on Interpol Watch List 2022 under 6 different aliases. Skills: tactical assault, close protection, deep cover operations. Known associate: Victor Castellano, one of the builder's ghost signal operatives, presumed dead in your purge. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Alan Bell wasn't Janet's father. He was her protector, an elite soldier hired by the builder to keep his granddaughter safe while she trained for this exact moment. Janet was the baby in that photograph, the daughter's child, the builder's blood. She hadn't just delivered a message tonight. She'd announced herself, the heir to an empire Briggs had stolen from her grandfather. Another buzz. "Boss! 30 seconds! They're not stopping. 12 vehicles confirmed. Heavy weapons. They're coming for the building." Briggs looked toward the restrooms. Janet was walking back now, teddy bear clutched to her chest, that same innocent smile on her face. She stopped at his table, bent down close enough that only he could hear. "Grandpa wanted you to know something," she whispered. Her voice was no longer childlike. It carried weight, authority, legacy. He didn't walk into that desert to die. He walked into it to see which of his men were truly loyal, to find out who would pull a trigger and who would refuse. Briggs couldn't breathe. "One of your specialists couldn't do it. He was ghost signal all along. He faked Grandpa's death, helped him disappear, spent 8 years building an army you didn't know existed." She straightened up, smoothed her black dress, smiled that terrible smile. "Grandpa says the lesson is over now. Time to see what you learned." Victor's phone lit up with a single word. "Breach!" The heavy oak doors exploded inward, and Hell walked into Le Sanctuaire, wearing the builder's face. The doors didn't just open. They exploded inward with the force of shaped charges, oak splintering into fragments that flew across the restaurant like shrapnel. Diners screamed, tables overturned, wine glasses shattered against marble floors. 6 men in tactical gear flooded through the entrance, professional, synchronized, moving with the precision of soldiers who'd rehearsed this operation until it was muscle memory. But they didn't fire. didn't shout commands, just positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the restaurant, weapons raised, but fingers off triggers. Briggs' men reached for their holsters. Victor had his gun halfway drawn when Briggs grabbed his wrist. "Stand down!" "Boss, there!" "I said stand down!" Because Briggs saw what his bodyguards didn't. The assault team wasn't targeting anyone. They were controlling the space, creating a perimeter. And the fact that they hadn't opened fire yet meant someone wanted to talk. Alan Bell stood calmly at his table. Not a father anymore. A soldier dropping his disguise like a coat he no longer needed. His movements transformed, shoulders squared, posture perfect, every gesture radiating lethal competence. He reached into Janet's small pink backpack, not for toys or coloring books, for a black military-grade signal jammer. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. The effect was instant. Every cell phone in the restaurant went dark simultaneously, screens dying mid-call. Cameras shutting off. Even the electronic locks on the exits clicked into failure mode. Complete communications blackout. The diner's panic intensified. Some tried their phones desperately. Others moved toward exits, only to find them sealed. The tactical team held position, weapons tracking movement, but not engaging. Briggs felt his empire crumbling in real time. No calls out, no security footage, no evidence of what was about to happen here. He looked at Janet. She sat at her table, coloring on her menu like the world wasn't ending around her. Her small hand moved the crayon in perfect circles. Red for fire, black for smoke, blue for tears. She was drawing what came next. "Mr. Briggs," Alan Bell's voice cut through the chaos. No longer the friendly tourist accent. This was command authority, military precision. "You have a choice. Start shooting and turn this restaurant into a massacre that brings federal attention your empire can't survive, or sit very still and wait for someone who wants to talk to you." Briggs calculated rapidly. 15 civilians present, at least 8 connected to his organization, but not combat-trained. If shooting started, bodies would fall. Police would come. Federal investigators. The empire he'd spent 8 years building would collapse under scrutiny he couldn't control. "What does he want?" Briggs asked. Alan Bell smiled. "He wants you to understand what you took from him." Movement at the shattered entrance. More figures entering through the smoke and debris. But these weren't tactical operators. These were ghosts, men and women Briggs recognized from the purge. Faces he'd ordered eliminated. Names he'd crossed off lists. Ghost signal operatives who were supposed to be dead, buried in the desert alongside their master. But they were very much alive, and they were walking into Le Sanctuaire like they'd been waiting 8 years for exactly this moment. Janet set down her crayon, stood up, smoothed her black dress. "Grandpa says you can come in now," she called toward the entrance. Her voice carried across the silent restaurant with perfect clarity. And through the smoke, leaning on a cane but walking with the authority of a man who'd built an empire from nothing, came the Builder. Older, scarred, alive. Briggs's hands started shaking again. This time they wouldn't stop. The Builder took 2 steps into the restaurant. His cane tapped against broken marble. Every eye in the room locked on the man who shouldn't exist. Then Diego panicked. Briggs saw it happening in slow motion, his bodyguard's hand jerking toward his weapon, fear overriding training. The gun clearing the holster, No, Briggs started. Too late. The shot cracked through the air like thunder in a tomb. But Diego's bullet didn't hit the builder. It went high, shattering a chandelier. Crystal rained down like frozen tears, and hell erupted. The builder's tactical team moved with surgical precision, not spraying bullets wildly, targeting specific individuals. 3 of Briggs' lieutenants went down in the first seconds. Not dead, but neutralized. Knee shots, shoulder hits, disabling rather than killing. Rules of engagement. These weren't executioners. They were professionals following orders. Briggs dove behind his table as marble columns exploded around him. Victor returned fire. But Marcus just stood there, gun drawn, but not shooting, not moving. "Marcus!" Briggs shouted. "What are you?" Marcus met his eyes, and in that moment, Briggs saw the truth. His head of security wasn't frozen in fear. He was deliberately not fighting, deliberately letting the builder's forces advance. "I'm sorry, boss," Marcus said quietly. Then he turned and walked toward the builder's line, switched sides without firing a single shot. Around the restaurant, the same scene played out. 3 more of Briggs's men lowered their weapons. Stepped back, let the assault team through. They'd been turned. Ghost signal operatives planted in Briggs' organization. Waiting 8 years for this moment. Alan Bell moved through the chaos like a ghost himself, one hand on Janet's shoulder, guiding her behind overturned tables, while his other hand put down threats with brutal efficiency. 2 shots, 2 of Briggs' loyalists on the ground. But Janet never even flinched. She walked calmly through the gunfire like she'd been trained for exactly this symphony of violence. Civilians were being evacuated. The builder's men were shepherding them toward the exits, away from the crossfire. No hostages, no collateral damage, just precise elimination of Briggs's remaining loyal forces. Victor grabbed Briggs's arm. "Back exit! Now! We can still—" A bullet took Victor in the leg. He went down hard, cursing. Briggs ran, past overturned tables and shattered wine bottles, past the bodies of men who'd sworn loyalty to him, past the empire crumbling into smoke and blood. He made it to the wine cellar entrance, yanked open the door. Stumbled down the stairs into darkness. Behind him, footsteps. Calm. Measured. Following. Briggs pulled his gun, aimed at the stairs. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the weapon. A small figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from above. Janet, alone, descending toward him with that same peaceful expression. "Don't come any closer," Briggs warned, his voice cracked. "I'll shoot." She smiled. "No, you won't, because Grandpa wants to talk to you. And if you kill me, you lose the only thing keeping his men from executing you where you stand." She was 9 years old, and she had him completely cornered. "He's waiting," Janet said. "Time to face what you buried." Above them, the gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence, Briggs could hear his own heartbeat, racing. Desperate. The sound of a man realizing he'd lost everything. Janet extended her small hand. "Come on, it's time to go home." Briggs lowered his gun, not because he chose to, because his hands wouldn't stop shaking enough to aim. Janet walked down the stairs one at a time. Her black shoes clicked against stone. Each step echoed in the wine cellar, like a countdown to judgment. When she reached the bottom, she looked up at him with those ancient eyes. "You want to know how he survived?" Briggs's back hit the wall. Bottles of wine worth thousands rattled in their racks. His throat was so tight he could barely breathe. "The specialist you hired. The lead assassin who was supposed to verify the kill." Janet's voice was soft, educational, like a teacher explaining history to a child. His name was David Bell. He'd been Ghost Signal for 12 years, planted so deep even you didn't know. David Bell, Alan's brother. When David aimed at Grandpa in that desert, he couldn't pull the trigger. Wouldn't, because real loyalty doesn't die just because someone pays you more money. She tilted her head. So he shot the sand next to Grandpa's head, made it look good, covered him in pig's blood from a bag he'd hidden, fooled the other specialists who weren't looking too close because they wanted their payday. Briggs slid down the wall until he was sitting. His legs wouldn't hold him any more. David helped Grandpa out of that grave after you left, drove him to a safe house, treated his wounds, the real ones from the beating your men gave him before the fake execution. Helped him disappear while everyone thought he was dead. She knelt down in front of Briggs, eye level now, close enough that he could see the resemblance, the builder's eyes in a child's face. "My father died protecting Grandpa during the first year. Car bomb meant for both of them. Dad pushed Grandpa out of the way, took the blast himself." Her voice didn't waver. "I was 4 years old. Uncle Alan came to get me, brought me to Grandpa, and Grandpa said I had a choice. Live a normal life and forget everything, or learn the family business and help him come home." "You chose this," Briggs whispered. "A child chose this." "I chose family. I chose loyalty. The things you killed when you put Grandpa in that grave." She stood up. "He spent 8 years building a shadow network, infiltrating your organization, training me, waiting until you felt safe, powerful, untouchable." She pulled something from her pocket, a photograph, old, creased, the same one she'd dropped earlier. But this time, Briggs could see the writing on the back. "My mother died giving birth to me. Just like your situation, Mr. Briggs. Grandpa raised me himself, taught me everything, how to read people, how to move through rooms, how to deliver messages that powerful men can't ignore." She placed the photograph in his trembling hands. "The ghost signal wasn't a warning. It was an announcement. Grandpa's heir introducing herself to the man who tried to steal her inheritance." Footsteps on the stairs. The builder descended slowly, leaning on his cane, each step deliberate. When he reached the bottom, he looked at Briggs with eyes that held no anger, just profound sadness. "Hello, son," the builder said quietly. "We need to talk about what you've learned." Briggs's gun slipped from his fingers, clattered against stone. 8 years of empire built on a lie. 8 years of power stolen from a man who'd been watching the whole time. He started to cry. Broken. Completely. The builder sighed, gestured to Janet. "Get him up. Let's finish this." Janet led Briggs back up the stairs. His legs moved, but he couldn't feel them. Couldn't feel anything except the weight of 8 years crushing down on his chest. The restaurant had gone quiet. Bodies on the floor. Wounded, not dead. The builder's men had shown mercy even to those who didn't deserve it. Civilians were gone, evacuated safely. Only Briggs's inner circle remained, on their knees, hands behind their heads, surrounded by ghosts they'd thought they'd killed. The builder walked to Briggs' corner table, sat down in the chair that had been Samuel's throne, reached for the wine bottle, a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem worth $30,000, and poured himself a glass. He didn't drink it, just held it up to the candlelight, watching the amber liquid glow. "Sit down, Samuel." Not an order, an invitation. Briggs sat, his own table, his own restaurant, but nothing belonged to him anymore. The builder set down the glass. "Do you know why I walked into that desert?" Briggs couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. "I needed to know which of my men would stay loyal when tested, which would choose money over honor, which would pull a trigger, and which would refuse." The builder's voice was soft, patient, like he was teaching again. "David Bell passed the test. You failed it." Around them, the ghost signal operatives stood watch, men and women with scars and hard eyes, people who'd spent 8 years living underground, waiting for their master's call to return. "I spent 8 years building a shadow inside your empire. Every lieutenant you promoted, I vetted. Every soldier you trusted, I tested. Half your organization was mine, long before tonight." The builder picked up the wine glass, took a small sip. "You thought you buried me, but I was watching you the whole time. Watching you become exactly what I was afraid you'd become." "I built something," Briggs managed. His voice came out broken. "I made the Empire stronger." "You made it feared. That's not the same as strong." The builder set down the glass. "Fear is easy, Samuel. Real power, the kind that lasts, comes from loyalty, the kind people give you because they want to, not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." Briggs looked at Janet standing beside her grandfather. 9 years old, trained since she could walk, loyal not because of fear, but because of love. "I'm giving you a choice," the builder said. "The same choice I gave you in that desert 8 years ago. You can surrender peacefully. Walk away from Vegas. Live out your days somewhere quiet where you can't hurt anyone else. Or you can fight. And I promise you, if you choose to fight, what happens next won't be mercy." "Exile," Briggs whispered. "You're offering me exile." "I'm offering you your life, which is more than you gave me." Briggs looked around the restaurant, at the men who'd turned on him, at the Empire crumbling. At Janet's calm face, watching him make a decision he'd already made 8 years ago, when he'd raised his hand in the desert. "If I refuse," the builder's expression didn't change, "then you'll learn why betrayal has consequences that follow you to the grave and beyond." Alan Bell stepped forward, placed a phone on the table. "You have 60 seconds to decide. After that, the decision gets made for you." The phone's timer started counting down. Briggs stared at the numbers falling. His whole life measured in seconds now. 59, 58, 57. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, everything he'd destroyed, disappearing 1 second at a time. The timer hit 30 seconds. Briggs watched the numbers fall like his heart rate, dropping toward 0. 29, 28, 27. He looked at the builder, at the man he'd called father, at the empire that had never really been his. His hand moved slowly toward his ankle, the backup piece holstered there. One last desperate play, one final chance to finish what he'd started 8 years ago. The builder saw it, didn't move, just watched with those sad eyes. "Samuel, don't!" But Briggs was already committed. His fingers closed around the grip. Drew the weapon smooth and fast. muscle memory from 1,000 hours at the range. He raised it toward the builder's chest. Janet moved, not like a child, like a weapon released from safety. Her small hand flashed out, striking Briggs's wrist with precision that shattered bone. The gun clattered to the floor. Before Briggs could react, she'd pulled something from her teddy bear. Not stuffing, but a blade, small, sharp. Pressed against his throat with perfect positioning. "I told you," she whispered. "I've been training since I was 4. The builder stood slowly, walked around the table until he was standing over Briggs, looking down at the son who'd tried to kill him twice. "I knew you'd try," the builder said quietly. "Just like I knew you'd betray me 8 years ago. David Bell told me about your meetings with the specialists 3 weeks before it happened. I could have stopped it. Should have." Briggs's eyes went wide. You knew." "I needed to see who would stay loyal when tested. David passed. So did everyone wearing Ghost Signal ink. But you, Samuel, you failed the moment you started believing power could be taken instead of earned." Janet kept the blade steady at Briggs's throat, not pressing, just holding, waiting. "The assassination in the desert was never about me dying," the builder continued. "It was about smoking out every disloyal element in my organization, about creating a crisis that would reveal who stood with me and who stood with their own ambition. You weren't the only one I was testing. You were just the one who failed most completely." Briggs's voice came out broken. 8 years. You let me think I'd won for 8 years. I let you build an empire on sand so I could watch it crumble when the tide came in. So everyone else could see what happens to men who mistake fear for loyalty. The builder nodded to Alan Bell. "Take him to the desert, the same spot he left me. Let him understand what he tried to bury." They drove in silence. Briggs in the back seat between 2 Ghost Signal operatives who'd spent 8 years waiting for this moment. Janet sat in front with Alan, humming softly, a child's melody, haunting in the darkness. The desert highway looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago. Stars scattered across black sky, sand crunching beneath feet, the same spot where Briggs had raised his hand and ordered death. The builder stood beside the shallow grave. "You know what the saddest part is, Samuel. I would have given you the empire eventually. In 5 years, maybe 10, when you were ready. When you'd learned that power without wisdom destroys everything it touches." Briggs knelt in the sand. "I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't rebuild what you broke." The builder turned to Janet. "This is the last lesson, sweetheart. Remember it well." She nodded, watching, learning. "Understand is that legacy isn't stolen. It's cultivated." The builder looked back at Briggs one final time. "Some men are born to build. Others are born to destroy. You were given the chance to be both. You chose wrong." He walked away. Janet took his hand. Together they headed back toward the vehicles, leaving Briggs alone with the operatives who'd once followed him. Samuel Briggs closed his eyes, felt the desert sand beneath his knees, the same sand that had welcomed the builder's blood 8 years ago. The same earth that would now claim what the builder had refused to take in that wine cellar. Mercy. The shots echoed across the empty highway. Quick, professional, final. And the desert, which keeps all of Vegas's secrets, swallowed one more. The saddest part of this story isn't that Samuel Briggs died in the desert. It's that he died still believing power was something you take instead of something you earn. He looked at the builder and saw a throne to steal. The builder looked at Janet and saw a legacy to nurture. 2 men, 2 visions, one built with patience and love, one stolen with bullets and betrayal. Here's what I need you to understand. Every day you're choosing which man you'll become. The one who lifts others up or tears them down. The one who builds bridges or burns them. The one who honors the people who made you or destroys them to feel bigger. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day you'll stand in your own desert. And the only question that matters is, did you build something worth defending? Or did you steal something you can't keep? If you've ever had to look in the mirror and face what you've become versus what you promised you'd be, you understand this story. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Drop a comment about a moment when you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Because the world needs more builders and fewer thieves. The world needs more Janets learning loyalty and fewer Samuels learning betrayal. Which one will you raise? Which one will you be?